The scene opens at a grand wedding venue, with elegant decorations and a palpable sense of celebration in the air. Suddenly, the double doors swing open, slamming against the walls, silencing the crowd. A teenage boy, disheveled and wide-eyed, storms down the aisle, clutching a crumpled piece of paper in his trembling hands. "Stop the wedding!" he shouts, his voice cracking with urgency. All eyes turn to him, including his father, standing at the altar with a glowing bride. The boy locks eyes with his father and says, "You can't marry her. I know the truth." Gasps ripple through the crowd. The bride stiffens. The father's face pales. What truth could shatter this perfect moment? The grand hall was the epitome of luxury, a masterpiece of crystal chandeliers, golden accents, and sprawling floral arrangements. The soft hum of a string quartet filled the air as impeccably dressed guests exchanged polite laughter. Every detail, from the towering white roses to the champagne flutes sparkling under the lights, whispered affluence and perfection. At the center of it all stood Mr. David Walker, the man of the hour. A towering figure in every sense, David was the embodiment of success, a self-made millionaire whose name was synonymous with innovation and resilience. His tailored suit fit like a second skin, exuding confidence. As he adjusted his cufflinks, his chiseled jaw tightened in anticipation. This wasn't just another event. It was his wedding day, the culmination of years spent rebuilding a life after the devastating loss of his wife. Beside him was his fiancée, Elaine, a vision in silk and lace, with a smile so radiant it could melt even the coldest hearts. She was everything one could hope for in a partner. Elegant, kind, and poised to complete the picture-perfect family David had always dreamed of for his teenage son, Ethan. But beneath David's confident demeanor lay a hint of unease. A brief flicker of doubt crossed his face as he glanced at the audience, searching for his son. Ethan wasn't in his seat. Perhaps it was just pre-wedding jitters, David reasoned, brushing off the thought as Elaine gently squeezed his hand. The music shifted, signaling the ceremony's start. But as the officiant cleared his throat to begin, a disturbance stirred outside the hall. Faint murmurs turned into audible gasps as the doors swung open. Ethan Walker stood just outside the hall, his hands balled into fists, sweat glistening on his brow. He had been running, no sprinting, to get here in time. His heart hammered in his chest, not from exertion but from the weight of the decision he was about to make. He had tried so desperately to warn his father before this day. He'd hinted at it in their rare father-son dinners, cloaking his words in awkward teenage deflection. But David had been too busy planning the wedding, too blinded by Elaine's charm, to notice his son's growing unease. Elaine's smile had always seemed too perfect, her answers too rehearsed. And then there were the late-night phone calls, the whispered conversations Ethan overheard but couldn't quite piece together. Something about her didn't sit right with him. A week ago, Ethan had stumbled across an envelope buried deep in Elaine's desk while she was out. Inside was a document, a name he didn't recognize but felt compelled to investigate. After hours of online digging, what he found was enough to make his blood run cold. Now, standing at the threshold of his father's new beginning, Ethan knew he had to act. The stakes were too high, and time had run out. He stepped into the hall, and the opulence of the setting only amplified the tension in his chest. David saw him and smiled, but that smile quickly faltered as he registered the storm in Ethan's eyes. The boy didn't belong to the celebration. He was the storm about to break it apart. Elaine turned slightly, her expression faltering for a fraction of a second before she quickly regained her composure. Her hands, folded gracefully over her bouquet, twitched ever so slightly. "Dad?" Ethan called out, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. "We need to talk. Right now." The room froze, the ceremony suspended in time. The first crack in the facade had appeared, and the storm was just beginning. Elaine Parker was a master of reinvention. From humble beginnings, she had clawed her way up the social ladder, discarding anyone who no longer served her purpose. But her relationship with David Walker wasn't about love. It was a carefully calculated move, a piece of a larger plan orchestrated by her and her shadowy accomplice, Marcus Kane. Marcus, Elaine's ex-lover and partner in crime, was a cunning manipulator with a history of swindling wealthy individuals. Together, they had run this scheme before, though never on someone as high-profile as David. This wasn't just about siphoning off a few dollars. It was about seizing control of Walker Enterprises, a company worth billions. Their plan hinged on David's trust and the pretense of a perfect relationship. Elaine played the devoted fiancée flawlessly, earning the admiration of David's friends and the adoration of the media. Meanwhile, Marcus worked behind the scenes, fabricating documents and creating false identities to ensure their plan's success. But there was a wrinkle they hadn't anticipated: Ethan. Elaine had tried to win the boy over, but his skepticism proved unyielding. Worse, her attempts at charm only seemed to deepen his mistrust. She knew Ethan was observant, perhaps too observant, and her every interaction with him was laced with subtle tension. "Ethan is a liability," Marcus had warned her during one of their clandestine meetings. "If he keeps sniffing around, this whole thing could unravel." Elaine had dismissed him at first, but she now felt the pressure mounting. Ethan had been digging, and she suspected he had uncovered more than she'd anticipated. Their plan was in motion, but the cracks were showing. As the wedding drew closer, so did the stakes. For Elaine and Marcus, failure wasn't an option. Not when so much was on the line. It had started innocently enough. Ethan was looking for a stapler in Elaine's office when he noticed a partially open drawer. Inside was a manila envelope with his father's name on it. Curiosity tugged at him, and against his better judgment, he opened it. What he found was baffling: a legal document naming a Marcus Kane as a stakeholder in Walker Enterprises. Ethan had never heard of this man before. Why would his father's company be connected to someone Elaine never mentioned? His heart raced as he sifted through the papers. Bank statements, contracts, and email printouts, all pointing to a relationship between Elaine and this Marcus. But the most damning piece was a photo tucked beneath the documents. Elaine and Marcus, laughing together on a yacht. Ethan's stomach churned. He didn't know the full story, but he knew enough to sense danger. Over the next few days, he dug deeper. At night, when Elaine and his father were occupied, he searched her laptop and found emails outlining a plan to manipulate company shares post-marriage. The words "seize control" and "liquidate assets" leapt off the screen. Ethan was no corporate strategist, but he knew betrayal when he saw it. This wasn't just about money, it was about dismantling everything his father had built. Now, standing at the threshold of his father's wedding, Ethan knew he had stumbled upon something far bigger than himself. Ethan had tried to talk to his father. 3 nights ago, he had mustered the courage to bring it up over dinner. "Dad." He had begun hesitantly, pushing his peas around his plate. "Do you know much about Elaine's past?" David had looked up, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "She's been open about everything." Ethan had faltered, unsure of how much to say without sounding paranoid. "I just think you should, dig a little deeper. Maybe check who she's been associated with." David had chuckled. "Son, you've been watching too many spy movies. Elaine's wonderful, and she's been nothing but honest with me." That conversation replayed in Ethan's mind as he paced in his room later that night, debating his next move. He could confront Elaine directly, but what if she denied everything? Worse, what if she manipulated his father into thinking Ethan was the problem? The clock ticked down to the wedding, and Ethan's anxiety grew. He considered telling someone else, a family friend or a trusted employee of his father's company. But who would believe him, a teenager, over Elaine's perfectly polished image? The night before the wedding, Ethan made his decision. He would stop the ceremony himself. There was no other way. The stakes were too high to remain silent. But as he rehearsed his plan, doubt gnawed at him. What if he was wrong? What if this Marcus Kane was just an old friend, and the documents were misunderstood? No, he thought, shaking off the hesitation. He had seen enough. Elaine's lies were dangerous, and time was running out. He had to act, even if it meant turning his father's world upside down. The silence in the grand hall was deafening as Ethan's voice echoed off the ornate walls. "You can't marry her," Ethan repeated, his voice trembling but firm. "She's lying to you, Dad. She's not who she says she is." Gasps rippled through the crowd as David's face contorted with confusion. "Ethan, what are you talking about? This is your father's wedding day." Elaine's eyes flashed with anger, though she quickly masked it with a veneer of concern. "Ethan, sweetheart, I know this is hard for you. I've tried so hard to make you feel like part of this family. Why are you doing this?" But Ethan was undeterred. He pulled the crumpled papers from his pocket and strode up to the altar, holding them out to his father. "Read this. Look at these documents and tell me I'm wrong." David hesitated, glancing between his son and his fiancée. The tension in the room was palpable, every guest holding their breath. Elaine reached for the papers, but Ethan snatched them back. "No," he snapped, his eyes blazing with determination. "You don't get to twist this. Dad, please just read." Reluctantly, David took the papers. As his eyes scanned the contents, his face went pale. His hands began to shake, and the papers rustled as he flipped through them. The damning evidence, emails, financial records, the photo of Elaine and Marcus, was all there. "Elaine," David said, his voice low and quivering with disbelief. What is this? Who is Marcus Kane? Elaine opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, a voice rang out from the back of the hall. Maybe I can answer that. All heads turned as a man in a tailored suit stepped forward, his smirk as sharp as the knife he'd metaphorically driven into many backs. It was Marcus Kane, radiating confidence as he sauntered down the aisle. David's grip on the papers tightened. You? He demanded. What are you doing here? Elaine invited me, Marcus said smoothly. We thought it'd be fun to celebrate, and to see how far we could get. He shot a sly glance at Elaine, whose mask of composure had slipped entirely. The room erupted into murmurs. Elaine, now visibly panicked, tried to step forward. David, I can explain. Explain what? Ethan interrupted. How you were going to steal everything Dad's built. How you lied to all of us. He turned to the guests, raising his voice. They were planning to take control of my dad's company. This whole wedding was part of their scam. The crowd gasped again, and Elaine's face turned a deep shade of crimson. Enough, David bellowed, his voice cutting through the chaos. His eyes bore into Elaine's. Is it true? Was any of this real? Elaine faltered, her lips parting but no words coming out. The truth was written across her face, and the betrayal was like a knife in David's heart. Guards, David barked. Don't let them leave. As the security guards moved in, Marcus's expression shifted from smug to predatory. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a sleek smartphone. I wouldn't do that if I were you, he warned, his voice calm but laced with menace. David narrowed his eyes. What are you talking about? Marcus smirked, holding up the phone. One call and certain files about your company get leaked to the media. Let's just say they won't paint you in a favorable light. The room froze again, the air thick with tension. Elaine took a step back, inching toward Marcus, her hand gripping her bouquet tightly. Ethan's mind raced. He couldn't let Marcus and Elaine walk away. The stakes were too high, and his father's entire legacy was on the line. Suddenly, he remembered something: Elaine's laptop. In his frantic search for evidence, he had discovered that her email account was linked to a cloud server. Dad? Ethan whispered, pulling his father aside. I can stop them. Her laptop is still at home. All the emails and files, they're saved to the cloud. If we can access it, we can prove everything and stop them from blackmailing you. David's eyes lit up with hope. Are you sure? Yes, Ethan replied, his voice steady. But we have to act fast. Meanwhile, Marcus and Elaine were edging closer to the exit, their composure slipping as the guests began murmuring louder. David nodded, signaling the guards. Stall them, he ordered. Ethan slipped out quietly, sprinting to the family car parked just outside. His fingers fumbled as he dialed the housekeeper's number. Mrs. Carmichael, he gasped. I need you to turn on Elaine's laptop and open the email account. I'll guide you. The minutes ticked by as Ethan directed her step by step. Finally, the incriminating files were downloaded, and Ethan sent them to his father's phone. Back at the hall, David faced Marcus with renewed confidence. Your threats mean nothing now, he said, holding up his phone. The truth is in my hands, and you've lost. Marcus's bravado crumbled as two uniformed officers entered the room. David had called 911 moments earlier, and now the police were here to take over. Elaine's composure shattered. David, please, I didn't mean for it to go this far, she begged, tears streaming down her face. But David shook his head, his expression cold. You meant every word, Elaine, and now you'll face the consequences. As the officers cuffed Marcus and Elaine, the guests erupted into applause. Ethan re-entered the hall, breathless but victorious, and his father embraced him tightly. You saved me, David whispered, his voice choked with emotion. No, Dad, Ethan replied. I just did what Mom would have wanted. With the conspirators taken away, David turned to the crowd, his voice firm. This wedding is over, but this family is stronger than ever. The once celebratory hall now felt eerily quiet, the echoes of applause fading into a somber hush. The guests, still reeling from the dramatic events, trickled out in hushed whispers. The grand decorations, the carefully chosen flowers, and the ornate cake stood as hollow reminders of a day that was supposed to mark a new beginning. David Walker sat in the now empty aisle, his shoulders slumped and his face lined with exhaustion. The papers that had exposed Elaine lay crumpled on the floor beside him. He stared at his trembling hands, replaying the betrayal over and over in his mind. How had he missed the signs? He prided himself on being a man of discernment, a leader who could navigate the most treacherous business deals. Yet, when it came to matters of the heart, he had been utterly blindsided. The memories of his late wife flooded back to him. Their laughter, their shared dreams, and the unshakable bond they'd built together. Elaine had been nothing like her, and yet he had let himself believe in the illusion of love again. It wasn't just his pride that hurt. It was the realization that he had put his son, his legacy, and even his late wife's memory at risk. Ethan approached cautiously, his sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. He sat down beside his father, hesitant at first. "Dad," he began softly, "are you okay?" David didn't respond immediately. When he finally looked at Ethan, his eyes glistened with unshed tears. "You were right, Ethan," he said, his voice breaking. "I should have listened to you." Ethan shook his head. "You couldn't have known. She fooled everyone." David let out a heavy sigh. "But you saw through her. You protected this family when I couldn't. I don't know how to thank you for that." The weight of the betrayal lingered between them, but so did a newfound understanding. They sat in silence for a moment, letting the enormity of the day settle in. "Mom would have been proud of you," David finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan smiled faintly, the first genuine smile he'd managed all day. "I hope so." The following weeks were a blur of legal proceedings, media scrutiny, and personal reflection. Elaine and Marcus were charged with fraud, their scheme unraveled by the mountain of evidence Ethan had unearthed. David, though wounded, took solace in the fact that justice was being served. Amid the chaos, father and son began to rebuild. Their relationship, once strained by misunderstandings and distance, had taken on a new depth. David made it a point to spend more time with Ethan, no longer burying himself in work or seeking solace in distractions. One afternoon, they found themselves sitting in the backyard, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves. David had a box in his hands, an old shoebox filled with mementos of their family's past. Photos, letters, and trinkets that Ethan hadn't seen in years. "I thought it was time we revisited these," David said, placing the box between them. Ethan sifted through the items carefully, smiling as he held up a picture of their family at the beach. "I remember this day," he said. "Mom made us build that ridiculous sandcastle." David chuckled. "And you insisted it needed a moat." It collapsed 5 minutes later. They shared a laugh, the first unburdened moment they'd had in what felt like forever. As they continued going through the box, David pulled out a worn journal. "This was your mom's," he said, his voice tinged with emotion. "She wrote down her hopes for our family, her dreams for you." Ethan opened the journal carefully, his eyes scanning the delicate handwriting. One entry caught his attention. "No matter what happens, I hope David and Ethan always have each other. That's what matters most." Ethan looked up at his father, tears brimming in his eyes. "I think she knew we'd be okay," he said softly. David nodded, his own tears threatening to fall. "We will be," he replied. "Because of you, Ethan. You reminded me of what's important." In the days that followed, David surprised Ethan with a small gift, a modest but meaningful token of his gratitude. It was a gold bracelet, engraved with the words, "For courage and loyalty, Ethan, my hero." Ethan was speechless as he fastened it around his wrist. "Dad, I don't know what to say." "Say nothing," David said with a warm smile. "Just promise me you'll keep being the incredible person you already are." For the first time in a long time, they both felt whole. The storm had passed, leaving them stronger, wiser, and more connected than ever. The story, though marked by betrayal and loss, ended with a message of hope, that even in the darkest moments, love and loyalty could light the way forward. This story reminds us that courage and loyalty can triumph even in the face of deception and betrayal. Ethan's unwavering commitment to protecting his father not only uncovered the truth, but also strengthened the bond between them. It's a testament to the power of speaking up when something feels wrong, even if it means standing alone. Life will often test us with moments where the stakes are high and the choices are difficult. But it's in these moments that character is forged. Ethan's bravery serves as an inspiration to trust our instincts, fight for what we believe in, and protect the ones we love. In the end, the greatest victories aren't about defeating the enemy. They're about rebuilding trust, finding hope, and emerging stronger than before. If you enjoyed this story and want more tales of courage, justice, and heartwarming triumph, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Join us next time for another journey that will keep you on the edge of your seat.